Hi, everybody. My name is Jenny, and I run LIATI Institute. And today I want to kind of give everybody just a little sprinkle of what spiritual alchemy is and how we use it in the LIATI system. So this work has been in my field, and I've been working through this system since I was about 19 in a very, I'd say organic way. It's not so classical alchemy, but it is still alchemy. So I want to bring it home to everybody and bring it grounded into an understanding where people understand where they're like, oh, I am doing alchemy every day. And I just didn't realize that's what it was. And when I understand that's what I'm doing, I can see that there is a process to it, a step-by-step process that I can use to help to transform myself into the best version of who I am or I can be in this life. So let's get started. So spiritual alchemy is essentially a journey toward enlightened embodiment, right? And at LIATI, this is one of our prime values or principles that we ask to expand ourselves to our higher self or our highest potential, and then we try to bring it back down into somatic embodiment. Because it doesn't matter how much you know, it really matters what you practice and how much you embody, because that's where your frequency actually lives. Okay, if we just are full of information here without practice, that's just kind of like being a big bobblehead running through the world. And what we know through many, many systems of depth psychology, of mysticism, is that when we die or leave our body, it doesn't matter what we know, it only matters what we understand, and that's our soul's development level. So through spiritual alchemy, we really get this system of how do I develop my soul? How do I enlighten myself? How do I raise my frequency? How do I ascend? And it's beautifully done so that there's a step-by-step protocol for it. Okay, so let's get started. So, spiritual alchemy. What is it? Well, what is normal alchemy? Let's start there, okay? Alchemy is a really, really old system, but what it is a system of transformation that started about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, probably before that, that starts to transfer this lead or kind of benign metal into gold, okay, a base metal into something valuable. So that is symbolic, of course, of how we transform as a person from this material, gross element of lead, heavy, material, very dense. You could call it a very dense, unevolved soul, into a soul that's made out of gold, which is an enlightenment state. Okay, and we could also say that lead, in our mythologies in LIATI, we say that lead is ruled by Saturn and Cronus and the depressed one, the leaded one. As we move through our own shadow or darkness, we start to transform that into gold or into wisdom. So alchemy is about that, essentially. Although in the past, it has been about the physical transformation of metals. Okay, but what it is a 7-step process, okay, that uses chemistry in traditional alchemy, medicine, astrology, the study of metals, and also spiritual mysticism to reach purity and perfection within the actual metal itself. However, in alchemy, a big part of it was that the practitioner had to be pure as well in order to be able to transform those metals. So it's very much the observer effect that you get what you expect. So you can't create gold if you're not already at a gold frequency. It's almost like you couldn't experience that for yourself unless you had done the inner work. Okay? But it is a very multifaceted system. But again, we ask, where have we seen this number 7 other places? Okay, we see it in chakras, at least in our system that we usually use. We say we have 7 major chakras that we go through or develop through, different psychological states, different purification of those states, so that we can reach this crown chakra of enlightenment, right? So 7 is a pretty normal number. We know that we actually have about 13 chakras we use every day in our bodies if we're at that gold state. But as the beginning stages start, we can say we have 7. Okay, the key elements of alchemy. We'll start with the history. So alchemy, they say, began in ancient Egypt, which was called the land of Chem. And that's ancient Egypt, probably like 3,500 BCE, before Common Era. And the father of alchemy was Thoth. Okay, Thoth is an Egyptian god. Here he is. And you've probably seen this guy. He looks like he's got this like bird face, and he's always holding a medicine of some kind. Okay, the medicine of enlightenment. Right, he was known to have written the Emerald Tablet, which is this beautiful carving, I guess, that really says some key elements about life and about medicine and about enlightenment. And one of them is the inner is the same as the outer. Okay, the inner vibration matches the outer vibration of life, which we know from manifestation work, that's very true. If you want to know what your belief system is and how your life is going internally, look at your external life. Okay, it's going to mirror everything that's happening in your inner landscape. So the Emerald Tablet firstly says that. Secondly, it says, wholeness is actually, when you're whole, you are part of oneness. You are source light. You're not separate any longer. So the process of alchemy is to get you to connect and plug back into your beautiful source light that you are. Okay, instead of being a separate ego that thinks it's so important and thinks that it is in control and in charge, when really the dynamic is in alchemy that our consciousness, our higher intelligence is actually in the driver's seat when we're full and complete with the cycle, not this small little separate me. Okay. And once again, we separate the subtle, the truth or the pure essence of who we are from this gross material false identity, which we might call shadow or trauma programming or conditioning. We try to purify ourselves to get our higher self, our pure essence, our spirit, to really embody us and shine out in this embodiment rather than our programming, our trauma patterns, our shadow, our inner child that might be wounded, our inner teenager that might be pissed off. We try to get those parts purified so that we can actually be whole, authentic, and embodied. Okay, and in this Emerald Tablet, it also gives you the perfect equation of how to go from an ego into spiritual wholeness. And that's freedom. Okay, that's what we might call Satori, enlightenment, freedom. Yeah. And this is old. This is like 5,000 years old. So this is nothing new, right? We've been working on this for a long time. And yoga is a system that we're pretty familiar with now that is a common system of spiritual alchemy, right? But from ancient Egypt, it kind of went into Hermetic alchemy. So in the system, Thoth becomes Hermes in the Greek. And Hermes is the god of communication. He rules Mercury. He's also the god of medicine, of enlightenment in many ways. He's the only god that can travel between the upper world, Mount Olympus, the human world, and the underworld. So his consciousness is that of freedom because he's done the work. So he's able to transform himself everywhere. Okay, he's called the angelos in Greek, which means the angel. So it's akin to an angel frequency, Hermes, who's this vibrational love frequency that can travel everywhere to help people heal. Okay, so we call it Hermetic alchemy when we get into the Greek system of alchemy based on Hermes. But they think, a lot of people think that Thoth and Hermes is the same soul. So pretty interesting. All right. And some concepts in alchemy that we're not going to go over so much in this lecture, but are there in the readings if you'd like to get deeper. The elixir of life, when you actually drink from the alchemical cup and you drink and actually become this gold, you live forever, right? Your consciousness is aware, it's awake. And when you're awake, you cannot die, right? Because this body might go away, this body might change into some other form, but your consciousness remains alive. So you're aware that you're not actually a body, that you're a spirit inhabiting a body. And more than that, you're actually source light inhabiting a body. So there's no death or birth when you are source light, you just exist all the time. Okay, you're eternally alive, you're immortal, essentially. Okay, Philosopher's Stone. This was made very, very popular in the Harry Potter books about the Sorcerer's Stone, but same concept. Nicholas Flamel was one in those movies, I believe, who basically made the eternal life stone. Okay. Same thing in alchemy. There is this idea of the Philosopher's Stone that can instantly transform any metal into gold. So instant transformation, instant enlightenment, in other words. Okay. So the history of alchemy, we're not going to get super into it, but here it is. Again, Egypt, probably before 3000 BCE. I imagine it probably started in Atlantis, which was before Egypt. And that knowledge was kind of washed up on the Egyptian consciousness back in the day. Okay, so we go all the way through the history of alchemy. It goes through Egypt. We find the gold or the Emerald Tablet, gets to the Hermetic alchemy in Greece. Eventually, it gets into Islam in that tradition in Persia. goes into the medieval empires, and it gets into the Renaissance, where it really had an up-leveling and a rebirth. And then today, of course, we have our current era of alchemy, which we see through yoga and energy healing, and when raising our vibrations and doing our soul work, doing our shadow work, doing our inner child work through psychology. And Wicca is a really, and witchcraft, those sorts of systems of alchemy are symbolic references to this ancient system. Okay, you'll see why when we go through this lecture. So casting spells, doing work with candle work and feather work, and trying to change our internal frequency to attract something new in our life. That is totally alchemy. So the secret is alchemy, right? It's very enmeshed into our consciousness. We just don't know it is alchemy. All right, so what's spiritual alchemy? Well, it's a 7-step system of transformation. Okay, it helps to purify ourself by transmuting our negative or leaded elements or shadow elements into a higher state of consciousness. Okay, so we can say we change shadow into light, we raise our vibration, we dissolve false ego patterns of trauma, of lower vibrations, of old patterns of personality, of conditioning, into a higher state of consciousness so that we have an ascension process happening. Spiritual alchemy is the step-by-step process of ascension. All right, so it's a system of enlightenment. It helps you to merge yourself with source, who you really are. You are part of the oneness. You are oneness, right? So how do we do that? We separate that false self from the pure self. Okay, and what we do is we really work on purifying that true self more and more and more through this practice. Okay, so the process of alchemy looks like this. Step 1, calcination. Okay, that's going to be this purifying fire that we get to have. And this is probably maybe the most uncomfortable part of alchemy. This is the wake-up call. This is the trigger that gets you on the path. We call it the baptism by fire. Okay, and we'll get into these in just a minute. Dissolution, number 2, that's when we take that pure essence that we find in part 1 and we start to wash it in water, or emotions, in other words. Step 3, we separate what we are, what we know we are, our true self, from the false self. And we start to really get that observer consciousness going. Conjunction, this is where we decide to merge back together into a new self, a new enlightened self, not fully enlightened yet, but more aware than we were before. Okay. Step 5, fermentation. This is where you start to become nothing like you ever would believe you could be. When you're at step 5, step 1 is so far back, you would not even recognize that person. It's almost like a past life. Okay, you're really starting to ferment and become something new. Okay, so you have to let go of your old self, your old personality, your old everything in order to birth into something new. And at this stage, it's actually a pleasurable thing, perhaps. Step 6, distillation. We refine that true self, that new self, that creative energy. And then step 7, we embody enlightenment. We have raised our frequency enough to stay at that vibration. Instead of popping up and dropping back and popping up, we can maintain an enlightened embodiment. Okay, a connection with our spiritual highest self and source light within our lifetime. Okay, versus just having it experienced in a meditation, perhaps, or in a breathwork session. In other words, the yoga becomes daily life. Okay, it moves off the mat into our actual body. The body is the yoga mat. Okay, so that's what we do. So let's look at it from a more detailed perspective here. 7 stages. Let's start with the first one, calcination. So this is the part where we're like, oh God, here's my wake-up call. Okay, it's a very masculine force. It's an action-based force usually that happens to us, or we eventually make it happen to us, okay, through our own actions. Okay, so the first stage of it is this wake-up call, this symptom, this event of change. We might call it a conversion experience where we hit rock bottom, perhaps. Okay, it's where the trauma or the triggers become so great that we have to change something or we die. Right? We've all been there, this rock bottom of life where you maybe have been trying to escape yourself or escape some sort of transformation process, some kind of pain, and then all of a sudden you're just sitting in it and you realize there's nowhere else to go. Right, and this is ruled by Cronus, by Saturn. And when we get to the Saturn myth in the LIATI 5 pillars, you're going to see this playing out very well in the Greek mythology. You'll see that he ends up chained to a wall in the middle of, or the darkest tomb of Tartarus, and he must do inner transformation if he's wanting to get out of that prison. And this is very symbolic of what happens to us when we get into this place of having to change, or else we just stay there stuck in our own prison of our mind, of our suffering, of our depression. Something's got to shift. So that's that first stage of alchemy. It's that wake-up call. All right. So the moment where you're done suffering and you've hit rock bottom, that's when you can start this calcination process. And of course, the word calcination comes from the word calcium. It's about ossifying yourself down to the bone. So really getting down to the bone, to the bones of what this is that I'm not wanting to deal with. Okay. So it's a pattern disruptor that happens. All right. And we start this process of breaking down the false self, of burning it up, and burning away attachments to things, so we can actually start to begin to find that pure essence within the material, within the gross of our lives. Okay, and this is a fiery thing, right? You can think about fire as consciousness, and consciousness kind of starts to burn you alive until you decide to do the work. All right, this stage of alchemy is all about focus. It's about the mind. It's about analyzing and focusing on something so much that you understand in the mind what it is. So this might be in real life, going to therapy, analyzing your patterns, analyzing your childhood, analyzing and thinking about what happened, really gaining knowledge about the thing that's happened, this about yourself. Okay. So in the LIATI 5 pillars, we kind of stud different parts of the program with these lectures that help you to see this calcination process. So you might go through the chakra class and say, oh, I think I might have a blocked root chakra because I'm in stress a lot. I don't have trust. I have fear. So there's a little calcination moment. Okay, I have this issue here. Or we might get into the Athena section with the developmental trauma stuff and be like, oh, this is my pattern from childhood. Okay, this is what I experienced. Okay, so we're focusing that fire of self-evaluation and self-examination in this stage of alchemy. And a lot of people can take their whole lives doing this stage. Some people get stuck in this stage of just analyzing their problems without doing anything else about it. Okay, they become like bobbleheads, very full in the head, but without moving it anywhere else. And that's the bad thing that can happen with this. Okay, we become stuck in our mind of thinking about everything without moving into stage 2. Okay, again, it's ruled by Saturn, by Cronus, by the element of lead. So an idea in LIATI, we might say this is where your lectures and that mind food of self-discovery comes from, through all the different sections. Okay, you'll learn about trauma, you'll learn about developmental patterns of programming of childhood and how that might look in your personality going forward, and noticing that that's not my true self. That's just my survival strategy that I picked up when I was 4, and I'm still doing it, and that needs to burn away. But you have to know it's there first. So this is that calcination moment where you start to look at yourself and analyze it. All right. And for example, you might have a trigger that comes. That might be your calcination moment. You have this wound that someone pokes and you have this really strong reaction and you're like, wow, I need to look at this. This is not normal, right? This is not healthy. Okay. Then we start to understand our pain patterns. Let's say we start to do inner child work and we find out that from a mental perspective, I realize that I have an oral trauma structure from childhood, which means that I didn't get my emotional needs met and I became an adult early. Okay. And from that, I'm craving emotional nourishment, but I don't know what that is. Okay. I was the parent in my family before my parents were parents. Okay. So this is just all in the head. We understand this part of it from a very mental perspective, a mental lens. And then we get into the second stage, which is, of course, dissolution, which is all about water and stirring the pot with the feminine energy. Okay, so think about it as we burned ourselves into this ashy bit by analysis and understanding from a psychological level what we are, what's happening. And then what we do is we take that ash of understanding and we put it in water and we start to stir the pot. Okay, in this beautiful feminine watery energy. And of course, this is synonymous with feeling, okay, with the moon. The moon rules this part of alchemy. And just flowing, doing the shadow work, doing the reclaiming work, doing the inner child healing, doing the trauma recovery, really going into the basement of consciousness and loving those parts that were rejected or scared or angry, and when we're doing that, we're feeling those emotions. We're not thinking we're feeling them. We're actually feeling the raw emotion. And the only way you can feel a raw emotion is if you're embodied. So this part of the process is really about being in the emotional body, but more importantly, being in the actual somatic body. This is the somatic part of healing, surrendering into it, feeling the rawness of what happened, okay? Defrosting the pain pattern into fluidity. Okay. So at LIATI, this is done through breath work a lot. We do a lot of dynamic breath work to melt those pain patterns, to get them liquefied again. Okay, it's also done through meditation and also through coaching calls if you choose to do the plus version of the 5 pillars. We get into these alchemical transformation points of water. And this sometimes is the hardest part of alchemy, the surrendering into feeling, letting go of control, letting go of the ego that says I'm supposed to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way. And you might find that when you actually feel something authentic, you act completely out of sorts. You might find yourself screaming or punching or crying hysterically when you're somebody who's usually quite in control and rigid. So this part of alchemy really requires courage, I believe. Okay. For instance, if we're going with that same pattern of someone who was neglected in childhood, they might have to feel their aloneness, how isolated they felt, how rejected they felt, how abandoned they felt. And of course, in that is a lot of anger and then a lot of sadness. So can you really let yourself feel and dissolve into that liquid of feeling in this stage of alchemy? Right. And I must say, at this point, we start to talk about a little bit about wounding and karma and ancestral trauma. You know, if we don't do our own trauma work, if we don't do this alchemical process, we simply pass it on to someone else, usually our kids. And from a soul perspective, you know, did we choose our parents to have the wounding so that we could experience the pain, so that we could actually heal that pain and create wisdom from it? Yes, probably. So this part of alchemy, we can really say that any kind of emotional wounding is a soul contract that we are here to heal. All right, even if it's not ours, even if it was just recycled from our parents down to us, each of us gets the choice to decide if we want to do this work or not, in order to not pass it on into the collective. Okay, so just a little side note there. We talk about that a lot in LIATI. All right, next stage is separations. This is when you've developed, you've understood it, you've psychologically analyzed it, you felt it, and now what do you do? Okay, well, now you start to separate it. You say, okay, I realize that I have this true self that feels these raw emotions, and you know, and then I have this personality self that I've developed over the years to keep myself safe that's maybe not authentic. Okay, but what we do is we say this is ruled by air separation. So it's almost like taking a bird's eye view of yourself and starting to see what's true and what's not. Okay, developing an observer consciousness where we can distinguish this is my true self from my programming self. All right. So if you are one of those oral structures, your programming is to be a people pleaser and to put yourself last. Okay. So noticing that's your survival strategy, that's not authentic, and then choosing to do something differently. All right. So in LIATI, we call this the car of consciousness, and we say, who's driving your life? Who's driving your consciousness? Is it the inner child who thinks she has to please everybody and then feel completely empty at the end of the day? Or is it your higher wise woman self who recognizes the child is driving from that observer perspective and says, honey, you know what? I see that you're doing that, and I'm going to go ahead and remove you from the driver's seat, strap you into the car seat, and I'm going to make sure you're safe because I love you, and I'm the one who's going to drive. All right. Or a similar way might be, oh, this is a shadow pattern. This is my reactive self who's trying to get away from pain. Okay, I see this is my reactive self. This is my shadow self, and I see she's driving in this particular area of life. And I'm going to choose to see from this air, this higher perspective, this place of separation, and notice my inner voice, notice my posture when this part's in the driver's seat, notice my breath is different, probably shallow, when this part's in the driver's seat, and I'm going to choose to change drivers. Okay. This is the actual like lifting of the reps, as we call it. When you go to the gym and you're building a new muscle, you have to first recognize the old pattern and try to make those new fibers stronger. Okay. So at LIATI, this will be when you're triggered by something, you take a time out and you say, wait, who's driving here? And then you decide consciously to switch. All right. So for example, if you're an emotional eater and you notice, oh, I'm emotionally eating, I'm looking at my fridge and I want to eat something, and you say to stop and pause, and you go, wait a second, that's my inner child trying to feed herself because she wasn't nourished as a child. So I'm just trying to get that nourishment through food, and that's really not my true self. But I can pause and I can say, wait a second, switch drivers, and let the inner adult, inner wise woman, inner mother say, what am I feeling right now? Okay, what does my inner child need right now? And we can start to meet those needs in a different, more aware way. All right. Part number 4 of spiritual alchemy. This is when we take the observer consciousness of part 3, the separation, and we start to build a new reality. So we've started to kind of break apart what's not us from what is us. And now we know what is us, that wise woman essence, the inner mother, the inner adult, and we try to build on that vibration. Okay. Instead of giving energy to the shadow, we give it to the new self. All right. So we create new rituals and routines and habits that are going to keep us focused on that wise woman self. So we're starting to finally like put it into the earth plane, put it into grounded action. All right. We put ourselves back together in this conjunction point where we're like, okay, let me just put myself all back together with this new body, this new self, this new mind, this new breath practice, this new posture. And that's what I'm going to practice from here on out to stabilize and to build that vibration, to keep it consistent so I can maintain that new vibration. Okay, rather than jumping back down into shadow vibration and low vibration and then coming back up. This is the point in alchemy where we start to maintain a higher frequency through new rituals, routines, actions, and awareness. Okay, we can maintain a higher vibration for longer. All right, we're more pure. And another way of saying that is that your chakra bodies are cleaned out. Okay, your neurological system is more regulated. That's the way we can say this. Okay, your shadow is a little bit more integrated. All right, and we can continue to reclaim and integrate that higher self into the driver's seat of life. All right, we're cultivating that inner wise woman essence as the true self because she is the true self. All right. So we say the archetypal medicine might replace your old patterns. And in the 5 pillars, you get to sample a lot of different goddess archetypes, and you can try them on, so to speak, and see how that raises your frequency. And when it does, you get all these new rituals and routines to maintain this. All right. So it's very nice. Yeah. So for instance, with that same example we're using with that person who wasn't nourished, who realizes she's a people pleaser, that's not her real self, etc. Maybe the action step here is to recognize that she has no boundaries and to start crafting boundaries with people in a compassionate, clear way. And that's a new action step for her to maintain that frequency. All right. So I just want to say it's kind of interesting in alchemy because what tends to happen, especially with people that do a lot of therapy, and I'm just saying this because I've seen it over the years, not that I don't love therapy, it's a great thing for everybody to try, except for me and for some people I work with, it tends to just go between cycles 1 and 2. Okay, so it's like I'm triggered, I'm thinking, I'm analyzing myself, I feel some stuff, I get a little embodied, and then I go right back to analyzing. Okay, and we can get stuck in this cycle of 1 and 2 without actually moving to part 3, which is that separation, that observer consciousness, and implementing new habits and routines into our life. So just ask yourself, am I ever cycling through stages 1 and 2? Because those are only the first 2 stages of alchemy. We're not going to get to that enlightened self by just recycling our feelings and our thoughts, because thoughts and feelings aren't facts. Okay, they're not the fact, not the true self. They are waves that we surf. They are structures that we have in place until they change. All right.